All right, buckle up because we are diving deep into quite the enigma today, Ted Bundy. You're here because you want to understand, like, what made this seemingly average guy commit such horrific acts.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where we're going beyond just the headlines, trying to understand what was going on in his mind.
And you're spot on to be so drawn to that psychological aspect. With Bundy, that's really what's so fascinating, honestly, even chilling about his case.
Yeah.
He really just shattered our perception of what we think a serial killer should look like. He could blend in, he was charming, even charismatic. These aren't things you usually think of with someone who commits such brutal crimes. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous.
It's almost like he weaponized being normal. And talk about contradictions. We've got a ton of sources here, right? We've got FBI files, psych evaluations, even things Bundy said himself.
Right.
And it paints, well, a very complicated picture.
Absolutely.
So let's start right at the beginning. Childhood. Some people describe his childhood as, like, deeply troubled, potential abuse, maybe being bullied because of a speech impediment.
And that's where it gets really interesting, because then you have other sources, like his childhood friend Sandy Holt, and she describes his upbringing totally differently. A church-going family, a loving adoptive father. So were these differences just faulty memories? Or was Bundy purposely manipulating people, even back then? It's so hard to know for sure, but you can't ignore the impact of those early years, whatever they were really like, on his psychology and how he turned out.
Yeah, it makes you think, right? Like, how much weight do those early experiences have? Did those contradictions, those possible traumas, did any of that plant a seed for what he would become? And then on top of that, there's this really eerie thread that runs through all of Bundy's relationships with women. Like, the sources hone in on two in particular: Diane Edwards, his girlfriend early on, and then Elizabeth Klupfer, who he actually lived with for a while.
Right, and that's where we start to see a pattern, a very chilling echo of his victims. Like, a lot of the sources point out these striking similarities between them. Physical appearance, age, even their backgrounds. This wasn't just random. Profilers, they look for these echoes because it can tell you a lot about why a killer chooses who they choose, what motivates them.
It wasn't just a dark reflection. It was like dozens of them all pointing back to something deeply, deeply disturbed.
Exactly.
But then even more unsettling, right? While he was with these women, seemingly completely smitten with them, he was committing these horrific acts at the same time. Talk about a double life. And we see this stark contrast in other parts of his life, too. Politically active, worked on a suicide hotline, even wrote about preventing rape.
Wow.
All while leading this horrifying secret life.
It's almost, it's hard to wrap your mind around that level of compartmentalization, Just think about it. He was learning things, especially in that crime prevention work. And it's chilling to think that might have actually helped him evade capture for so long. And this kind of like duality, it's a classic sign of a power control kind of serial killer. His crimes, they weren't just about the act itself, they were about dominating someone completely, that intoxicating feeling of control over another person.
And that need for control, that desire to dominate, it went way beyond just the crimes, didn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It bled into his everyday life in these really unsettling ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like even his relationships with these women, right? Like the sources say, he needed to control every little detail, almost like he was directing some kind of twisted play.
It's like his need for control, it like completely took over every part of his life. Even, right down to his capture, which, by the way, that story reads like a Hollywood thriller.
Totally.
Only this is, terrifyingly real.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. August 1975. So Bundy gets pulled over. Routine traffic stop, right?
Yeah, this seems pretty normal.
Exactly. But get this. The cops, they search his car, and they find handcuffs, an ice pick, pantyhose.
Oh, wow.
All this stuff that matched exactly what Carol Durante described. And she was a woman who had just barely escaped, like just months before, from Bundy trying to kidnap her.
And it's because of her, because she got away and then was able to pick him out of a lineup that really gets the ball rolling, as far as justice goes.
Exactly. She was so brave.
Yeah.
So he ends up being convicted of kidnapping, gets sentenced.
Right.
But, of course, that's not the end of the story. Law enforcement, they're starting to put the pieces together. They're linking him to other cases. And his credit card records, those put him near where some other young women had disappeared.
Like a horrifying puzzle, and the pieces are all starting to fit together.
Exactly. But get this. So while he's waiting for his murder trial in Colorado, Bundy decides he's going to be his own lawyer.
Oh,
You know, right? Which you can imagine that gave him a lot more freedom. Like he could go to the law library and everything, which is exactly where he makes his escape, June of '77, jumps out a library window.
are you serious. It's like he was a ghost or something, appearing and disappearing whenever he wanted.
Right. They caught him again, but then, believe it or not, he escapes again from jail. December of the same year. This time he ends up in Tallahassee, Florida.
And that's where things take like an even darker turn, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, January 1978, Bundy attacks 4 women at a sorority house at Florida State University, brutally murders 2 of them.
God.
Then a few weeks later, he kidnaps and murders a 12-year-old girl, Kimberly Leach. These attacks, I mean, it was a terrifying escalation of the violence, the depravity.
It's almost unbearable to think about, how can someone do those kinds of things?
It's a question we're all left with. And amidst all the horror, there are clues, things about how he acted that give us a little bit of a look into his mind, how it worked. It's really twisted.
It's like trying to make sense of the senseless.
But
Yeah.
those patterns, those clues, like you said, that's the only way we can even try to grasp the psychology of someone like Bundy. And speaking of disturbing patterns, I mean, we can't ignore the really awful details that came out about his crimes. The things that point to just how deeply disturbed he was.
Right.
The sources talk about this obsession with women's socks, necrophilia,
Right.
keeping trophies from his victims. It's beyond chilling.
It really gets you, and it's right to be disturbed by it. But those details, as awful as they are, they weren't random acts. It was all calculated, all about his need for control. For Bundy, those women's socks weren't just some fetish. It was a way for him to hold on to these victims, to keep controlling them even after death.
And it went way beyond just the socks. Driver's licenses, jewelry, photographs of his victims. It was like he was trying to create some sort of, I don't know, like a horrifying collection. Exactly. And those trophies, as horrible as they are to think about, they served a very specific purpose for him psychologically. They let him relive those crimes over and over, hold on to that feeling of power that control those acts gave him, which is terrifying. But it's something you see a lot with these kinds of killers, these power control motivated killers.
It's almost too much to process. And to think, Bundy actually talked about this stuff. I mean, he told Dr. Carlisle that he had like 6 or 7 pairs of socks in his cell, even bragged about how proud he felt when they were brought up in court.
It's chilling. And that pride, that sense of accomplishment he got from it, that's what's so telling. It just shows us that for Bundy, these weren't crimes of passion or opportunity. It was all carefully planned out, all to satisfy this deep psychological need he had for domination over other people.
It's incredibly disturbing. It's been decades now, and Bundy still fascinates and terrifies people. There are so many books, movies, documentaries, all about him, all trying to understand him. Why do you think we're still so captivated by him? What is it about Bundy?
It's because he really went against everything we thought we knew about serial killers. He was charming, intelligent, he could blend in anywhere. He wasn't some starey guy hiding in the shadows. He could have been anyone, someone you'd chat with at the store or at a party. Bundy made us face this really unsettling reality that evil, it can hide behind a totally normal mask.
Yeah, that is a haunting thought. And it makes you wonder, right? Were there signs? Could anyone have seen this coming? Could he have been stopped?
I mean, if we could go back in time, right? I think it's a question everyone asks with cases like his. And while we can't change the past, what happened with Bundy, it's a stark reminder to always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Pay attention to those red flags, those inconsistencies, any kind of manipulative behavior, because sometimes the people you need to watch out for the most are the ones who seem the most normal.
It's definitely something we should all keep in mind. Well, this deep dive into Ted Bundy, his life, his crimes, it's been fascinating and really unsettling. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that the human mind is incredibly complex. Evil, it can present itself in ways that we don't expect, even find disarming. And there's a lot we can learn from studying cases like Bundy's, not just about evil itself, but about being aware, thinking critically, and trusting your gut.
It's a good reminder that knowledge is power, and the more we understand about what motivates these horrible acts, the better we can protect ourselves and the people we care about.